and thanks, Amy, for everything you did. And it's my first ISOJ, and I'm just so impressed. Our paper is a little bit, you might think of it kind of like the state of data skills in both the practice of journalism and in journalism education. I'll show you some findings and some of the survey data that we working off of. I suspect some of you actually filled out our survey, so thank you. It's a really, I think, auspicious and interesting moment to talk about data and statistics and research in journalism. And by the way, first of all, I should say, Mark Coddington is my co-author, and he's an absolutely brilliant researcher at Washington Lee University, so shout out to him. I see Tableau and Facebook and Google are all either talking about or have rolled out new data journalism curricula and platforms, and that's an absolutely terrific thing. So what I want to do is just set the context a little bit. I think we've talked a little bit about post-truth today and alternative facts, and that table's been set, so I won't get into the political context, but it obviously helps frame what we're doing, and it frames our literature review. So one thing is, in the journalism business, there's been this long-standing conversation about math phobia, about statistical incompetence in journalism, and there's sort of nothing new under the sun. As Mark and I kind of went back into the literature, we're talking about at least 50 years of conversation in journalism and in journalism education circles about how do we make journalists more sort of math literate, how do we ensure that the right educators are in the classroom to make that happen. We think of data journalism as something somewhat brand new with the rise of open data sets on the web, the rise of data science. But really, you go back to the 60s and the 70s, and there are these great sort of founders like Phil Meyer who are talking about precision journalism and computer-assisted reporting. Has been going for a really long time. So I want to acknowledge that there's a whole kind of prehistory to this. One thing I'm pretty interested in is the rise of other forms of knowledge that can complement our work as journalists. And that includes the massive amount of research data and research studies that are now available online. There was a study in PLOS that estimated there are at least 25 million open access studies now online in English, which is a huge resource for us. And then also all of the explosion of blogs by academics and other experts and all the Twitter feeds that provide expert commentary and analysis, data-informed analysis, that really is, I think, can help us as journalists, but is also a form of competition. And then finally, just the fall in price and the availability of software. So when we think about the kind of the new data journalism, we think about 538 and we think about Upshot. And if you kind of boil it down, in my view, to, what are they doing? They're doing very sophisticated data analysis in some instances, and in other instances, what they're doing is unpacking really sophisticated research and putting it in context so that people can understand it. Okay, so back to the paper and the data. So we through Harvard Shorenstein Center and the Journalist Resource Project, which if you don't know about it, go to journalistresource.org. It's a project that tries to bridge mass media and social science. But through that project, we conducted an online survey and got a pretty good response rate from both journalists and educators. And let me just show you some top-level kind of descriptive findings. So when we asked journalists, how do you assess your own ability to do statistical analysis? And we didn't define it. I think further research could follow up and be more granular on this. But about 11% said they were very well equipped. About half said somewhat equipped, and then about 40%, 43% said not well equipped. And then you can compare this to educators who are on the whole a little more confident, as you'd expect in the academy, but still not wholly sanguine about their own abilities. And I think this is a really good moment for reflection by us all. Like, I'm not a math whiz. I've done a lot of self-study, and I'm trying to get better. And I think probably all of us could say the same. So the heart of the paper was sort of two things. One was we wanted to compare journalists journalism educators and journalists on their views about statistics, data, and research. And then we wanted to look at educators in particular. So I'll break these out. And this is a little wonky in terms of the charts. But so the one statistically significant finding that we had, and this may surprise you, is that journalists actually think that research studies, research reports are much more important for the practice of journalism than do educators. I suspect that, Mark and I have talked about this, that to some extent, I think a lot of journalism educators who have PhDs, who are very sophisticated social scientists in their own right, kind of segment out their own research from when they teach the practice of journalism. But I think that journalists increasingly see real advantages in this huge trove of knowledge that's sort of now available to us. We can find experts who are much more, who have much more specific expertise in what we're reporting on. In the other categories, how much do you think it's important to do statistical analysis for the practice of journalism? About the same. 35 to 40% journalists and journalism educators. And then how important is it to interpret statistics, to be able to interpret statistics in a newsroom, 78, 80% for both, and interpret research studies about the same thing. So no real differences except on this use of research metric. How am I doing on time? Before? Okay, so I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. Here's one thing. It's not actually, this graph isn't in the paper, but I wanted to pull it out because I thought it was significant. I want to talk about journalism educators specifically for a second. So we asked about the level of student preparation and journalism programs for working with numbers and statistics. And the percentage reporting that there's extensive preparation for students going to newsrooms, really low. Can they do statistical analysis on their own? Very low. Can they interpret statistics from other sources? Is there extensive preparation for that? Not necessarily, though there's 63% of educators say that there's some preparation. And then finally, on interpreting research studies, on being able to really bring a skeptical eye to a lot of the data that's being produced out there, again, a kind of a mixed picture. There has been a long-running kind of fight in education, in journalism education, between what are loosely called the academic chi-squares, the people with PhDs, and the professional green eye shades, which refers to the visor that used to be worn by typographers back when. And the debate has been about who should be educating these students, how should they be educated. And so one thing that we found, and we thought this was pretty powerful for those of us who believe that there shouldn't be a fight, we should actually all move forward together in a common cause of kind of upping the level of statistical efficacy and fluency. We found that in terms of valuing statistics in journalism, there was no significant differences between those with and without doctoral degrees. And then rather than education, it was actually people's own ability to do statistics, which predicted how much they would value academic research in the practice of journalism and statistical literacy among educators. So the takeaway finding was really that the facility with and the passion for statistics and research in journalism can emerge from both academic and professional settings and find distinct applications in both the academy and in the newsroom. So I'll wrap up, but I think one thing that we can all do practically speaking is, as I said, Tableau and Facebook and Google are all rolling out these new data journalism programs. Cindy actually, I think, took one and was talking about it last night. I think we should all take these online kind of tutorials and programs and see how they work for us. Maybe we learn something. Maybe we can give feedback to these companies that are trying to elevate. So thank you.